Live streaming is on.
Okay, it seems it worked at the first time. I don't know how much it's gonna last. Let me see YouTube if we are streaming now. YouTube, please open. Start. I don't know how much it's gonna last. Let me see. Yes, you shut up. YouTube. No, that was the other screen. So, hello everybody. The other guy is the important one here as usual, but let's hope this does work for a while. Doesn't happen like yesterday. We have 3 cuts, and if we have a cut, I know you are in YouTube are going to warn us. So thank you so much for that. On the other side of the screen is my old friend, Mr. DiDIO. As you can see, he looks relaxed.
Very relaxed.
8
o'clock in the morning.
Oh, that's also true, but
Still drinking coffee.
normally your stress face was on, and now it's the relaxed face, which is a good thing for me to see. Believe me, I've seen you in both situations, and it's always better to see with them. So, people, Mr. DiDIO.
Howdy, sir. Thank you. Thanks for having me here. It's a lot of fun.
No, thank you. Thank you for being here. I know you've been out of the limelight for a while because you needed to relax, but how has it been for you, which you are, and it takes one to say this, but you're hyperactive. You're always.
It's different. It's weird. I mean, first of all, it seems like forever, but it's only been 2 months since leaving DC. So in that 2 months, I've reorganized my comics, been locked away for almost the full 2 months with the pandemic. Getting a lot of things in order. It's actually been great because I've actually caught up on a lot of things that I've been waiting on. And you're right, it is a lot more relaxing right now. Got a chance to catch your breath. It's running full speed for 18 years is exhausting. And to be honest with you, I went from one job to another. So this is the first time that I've had some downtime. I'm going to say honestly, in almost 40 years. It's kind of weird. If you think about it, I started at CBS in 1981. I worked there from 81 to 85. And then I went to ABC for, 85 to about 96, 97. Then I was with Mainframe. And then from Mainframe, went right into DC. Never really lost a beat. So you're right, though. It's weird to go from 600 to 60, so to speak. But it's actually kind of enjoyable for the moment. And you know what? With everything else going on, the priority is making sure everybody's healthy and safe, keeping in touch with everyone. And to tell you the truth, being on the East Coast, with my family on the East Coast and us on the West Coast, you're always anxious to wondering how people are doing. So it's good. So that's my primary focus, just to make sure everybody's okay.
Everybody's okay. I hope everybody in the family.
Yeah, everybody's good. Everybody's good. I got a lot of family in Brooklyn, which is a hot spot there. So, I'm always staying in touch with them just to make sure they're all right. But they take it real serious, and they're really locked up right now. Yesterday was one of my sister's birthday, and we had to give her we had to do it by long distance phone call. Which not as much fun, but we understand the circumstance.
Yeah, you're in a better situation than Jimmy, for example, because in his case he was in Brooklyn. You're like, okay, he could be better now because hotspot. No, he's in the middle of Florida, which is not exactly the best place to be either.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's nice out here in California. We have a lot of regular that we do. We still get out every day. You go for walks. You protect. You watch yourself right. Get to the stores. The stores are available. We're really not hurting from it. It's just the hardest part is not seeing people and working.
Yeah.
The way I like to work, and that's why I enjoyed comics so much is that collaborative aspect of working together, and that idea that we can all be building something as a whole. I think that's one of the great aspects. And I know a lot of people like working in their house by themselves. Some of our talent might not even know there's a pandemic right now because they never get out. But for me personally, it feels good. And I like working with people, so I can't wait to get back into that mix again and seeing people again.
Yeah, this is the fun part between brackets is that you left DC. And the pandemic didn't even give you the time to just think about the thick of things and going back, etc. Okay, now even if I want to be hyperactive again, the pandemic is telling me no, just stop.
Yeah, Well, it's interesting because what we did do, we scheduled a lot of travel, and that sort of went out the window.
Yeah.
Although I have a lot of credit with a lot of airlines at this moment, so fingers crossed we'll get back out there pretty soon. But you know, the funny part is that once this is over, I'm probably going to want to get right back into it again, and so
Yeah.
I've missed my window of vacation, and also I owe my wife a honeymoon, and we sort of missed that one too.
Well, but the honeymoon is going to happen. I know her. If this doesn't happen, you're dead. So sooner or later, you're gonna have, I know she's around. Hello, Leilani. And I hope it happens. You know, I'm going to tell it because I know she's around. Leilani, I hope the honeymoon is in Spain, just so you know.
Yeah, Spain. She wants to do Spain.
Yeah.
Well, she's in the background yelling.
Anyway, so it was CBS. It was Mainframe. I remember when you were. I met you when you were in Mainframe, just before DC through Jimmy, of course.
Yeah.
And what you were doing in Mainframe, I don't think many people realizes. It was one of the first. It was also pioneering stuff. I mean, we're doing a 3D animation almost before anybody else.
We were doing it before everybody else. Literally, Reboot that I worked on was the first animated TV show. And at that time, the only other computer animation existed at that time was Ants from DreamWorks and Toy Story from Pixar.
Yeah.
That's it. So I'm out there trying to sell computer animated television to people that only saw computer animation in movies. And that was intriguing because we had to convince people what to do. And the hard part was the team was figuring out how to do it themselves. I can't, you know, it's funny when you think back of your time and your career and the things you do. My time at Mainframe is probably the most special time for me because you're right, it was pioneering. The people that worked there were some of the most creative, inventive, gracious, wonderful people I've ever met, and actually I've stayed friends with them over the years too. Stay in touch with them. Just one of the best work environments, and it was so taxing for me because towards the end of my time there, I mean, I was living in New Jersey. I had an office in Los Angeles. Mainframe was based in Vancouver. I spent time in Toronto, where our distributors were. I was flying everywhere, over and over again, and I was literally on a plane 3 weeks out of every month, literally flying, and it takes its toll. You know, but because I was working with people that I cared about and material that I cared about, it made it easier. I loved that time. But actually, what happened was I flew out of Newark on September 11th. I was actually on a plane when that actually happened. Flew out of Newark. I was caught in Canada for 5 days. I couldn't get out. Couldn't get in touch with the family. I was anxious, and that's when I realized I couldn't keep up that pace anymore. And so that was when I decided I had to find another, change my job. And ironically, I wound up going to DC because I wanted to be based on the East Coast. I wanted to get away from California, and here we are. So, but it worked out really well. But the computer animation was interesting because we were learning it as it went, and there was moments there when we were working on shows, and one of the programmers would come in and go, "We got this new program. Here's this water program. Can you build a show with water? We can't wait to use it." And we used to start to change the shows based on what programs were available and the technology, and it was evolving. And these guys created the whole structure and the methodology. But there was I always say there's one defining moment on Reboot. We had all these, when I got in, they had all their scripts written already, and the show was just stuck in the mud. They couldn't figure it out. And what happened was we had a light switch moment, which means they were working computer animation as if it was cell animation, and it was very difficult to progress.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was they turned the logic around and they said computer animation is actually much closer to live action because you're building sets, building characters, building scenes. There's a spatial reference on how these things work. So ultimately, once we made that logic, we threw out an entire season's worth of scripts and rewrote them so that they were built more like live action scripts. So all you're doing is giving direction, and it's mostly on the voice actors. And as soon as we did that, production sped up because the animators were able to open them up. They knew what props they had, what sets they had. They didn't have to constantly build new things for every scene. It was a fascinating moment, and it was that light bulb moment. And I have to say that there's certain the bosses, my bosses there. You know, there's some wonderful people. But the three principal guys I worked with were a guy by the name of Ian Pearson, Gavin Blair, and Phil Mitchell. And those guys were just a dream. You know, Ian was the mad genius locked in the tower. He actually, they started Reboot because he had done the animation on the Dire Straits' Money for Nothing video.
Oh,
Yeah, he actually did that. He started in Effects House. They did the first computer animated characters ever, which was the Dire Straits characters, first computer animated characters of all time. And from that, they leveraged it into Reboot, and they built a facility and studio. It's an amazing story. But I never forgot that. But you had it's interesting. You have to come with a certain arrogance that you believe in something that nobody else even knows what you're talking about in order to convince people to buy it. And that attitude I sort of brought to DC a little bit. You know, there was always that sense that comics were, you know, a stepchild to everybody else, and we had to go out there and pound that drum and say, no, this is where it all begins. And so a lot of that conviction that we had in Mainframe, I came over with DC, so it became part of my portfolio moving forward. And you know, and plus, you know, I had a lifetime of love for comics. So it wasn't that hard to convince myself that this is the best place because I already knew it was. So it was my job to convince everybody else it was the best place.
no, that was something that the first day I saw you at DC, I think it was like 3-4 days after you started the job, like really fast. And I remember that our conversation, of course, about work, blah, 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 but it was mostly about love for comics. And that's something that the passion that it showed, and that was something that has stayed with me forever. And I talked to Jimmy like 10 minutes later, I think, and it was a conversation about people who loves comics. You know, work has to be in the conversation because, of course, when they're as a native representative, he's there as a, you know, as a new editor, executive, whatever you want to call it. But by the end of the day, it was two people who love comics talking about their love.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's the hardest part about the job, and because it is going in as a fan, you have to put the fan hat down. And it was interesting because I used to work when I first started with Paul Levitz, and he trained me a lot and really taught me so much about the business and everything about it. I mean, he really boot camped me for a couple of years, which was interesting because I really did come from the outside, which was something rare. You know, most of the people work their ways up through the ranks of DC. I came from the outside on an executive level, and you're coming into a preset system that's ingrained in granite, and you have to break out of it. But you know, and Paul pulled me through the boot camp. But what I always was interested in Paul was, I always said he always wore 5 hats. It's a 5-hat job. And the first hat is the Warner Brothers executive, or the executive, Warner Brothers at the time executive, which is looking at it from a corporate level and managing the material as an asset to the company. Then there's the publisher, who's looking at it from a profitability standpoint about how the company stays profitable. Then you go to the editor level, and on the editor level, you're looking at the construction of the line and maintaining the consistency and the behavior of the characters. Then you're the writer, right? And the writer is the one who's trying to push the envelope and push things and change and evolve because that's the most interesting thing to write. And then you have the most dangerous person in the room, which is the fan, which is the one who wants to protect and preserve everything exactly the way it was when he was 10 or 11 years old when he first read the characters, because that's where all the emotional resonance is for them. And we used to argue and discuss product and ideas, and I always used to say, I'll argue with all 5 of you, but the fan guy is the one I want to argue the least with because it's so personal and what you believe in that it sometimes clouds your decision making. And the hard part is when you're working on characters and story, you know, there's the old expression, every character is somebody's favorite. And you have to always remember that. You always have to be respectful for the fans because, you know, you might know there is absolutely no value in certain things to do on a profit level or just on a large scale level, but you have to be careful on how you phrase it because ultimately that one thing it might be that one person's thing, and now in today's world with social media, that one voice becomes so loud it can
Yeah.
distract from all the good things you're trying to create at the same time.
Yeah.
It was a learning process, and look, I was with DC for 18 years, so there's a lot of times I got it right, and there's probably 20 times more that I got it wrong. But it's an evolution,
Yeah, and it's also, we know how it works. Your your batting average can be, like 95% good or 90% good, but all people is going to remember the 10% or 5%. It's going.
Exactly.
That's how humans think. So every time I when you left DC, I had several conversations about that, and I never got into arguments because I don't want to, because friendship is above everything. That was my phrase with everybody. He's a friend above all. That's all it matters to me. But please stop thinking about the 10%. Everything else. And Bendis said the same thing, almost the same day. But Brian Bendis was like, you're always remembering the 10% stuff you didn't like, which you are completely, you have the complete right to not like it. But please, for the other 90%, you liked, he was responsible for it too.
Well, that's what I said. Look, I could name every single hotspot, and I always laugh because if you identify, one or two things that people didn't like, if you look at the amount of product that we put out was incredible. Know that, the sheer volume. I mean, on a yearly average, you're putting out about 1,000 periodicals and about 300 trades. Okay, so over 1,200, 1,300 items you're putting out every year. The idea that every one of them is going to connect with everybody is unrealistic.
Going to go crazy. That's
The funny part is on the reverse side, somebody goes, "Well, if you put out that much, why can't you put out the one thing that I want?" I'm like,
there's always going to be that. That's always going to be that one. That I wanted since I was a kid, and you never did it. It's like, there's a reason nobody in the industry did that book, not only DC. So you have to think that maybe your idea is not the right one.
Yeah, and and honestly, the fun part, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I so enjoy the darker, crazier, stranger corners of the DC universe. That's where my heart lives. I get Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Justice League. I get those things, but you give me a Metamorpho, Phantom Stranger, or something like that, and I'll be the happiest person in the room. So that because ultimately that's the DC that I knew growing up. It was all the crazy corners. Somebody asked me, who's your favorite writer artist team at DC, and I froze literally, because I guess you're supposed to say Wolfman Perez or something like that, or John Byrne, and this you're supposed to answer that question like that. And my answer, I just blanked, and I just said, I went, Bob Haney, Jim Aparo, and I mean, because every time that they got together, it looked beautiful, but man, that stuff is back crazy, I mean, it's really nuts. And
you mean the Specter book?
Oh yeah, I was thinking of the Spectre is Fleischer, and I love that book. No, I was thinking of the old Brave and Bolds.
Okay.
Yeah, the Brave and Bolds is where I used to love that stuff, because for me, DC Comics is Jim Aparo and Jose Garcia Lopez.
Yes,
those are my two guys. That's it. That's my. If you ask me what DC looks like, that's that. And I know people will say, "Don't forget Kurt Swan," or "Don't forget Jim Mooney," or "Don't forget this one and that one," and they start to brand it out.
Of course, yeah.
But for me, those are my two. Those are my two.
I agree. I remember as a kid reading, a lot of Aparo in Batman, a lot of Aparo in, of course, Batman and the Outsiders. Everything Jose Luis did, as he's a really close friend.
Yeah.
And everything he does, for me, it's every time everybody asks about Marvel, of course, you're gonna say Marvel's Kirby, Ditko, whatever. They're all then what you have later with Byrne, with George, etc.
Yeah.
But with DC, I almost like, no, DC for me is three names. It's Garcia Lopez, Aparo, and Joe Kubert.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Yeah, Joe. I mean, it's it's funny because when I was working at ABC before joining DC, I actually had done work in comics with Peripheral. I had worked with a couple of groups to do interviews with talent and things like that. I had been working in publicity at the time, so I liked doing interviews and things like that. So I actually had a chance to go to the Kubert School and meet Joe. And I have to admit, that's one of my first super comic book fan moments, weird wise. I wound up going to see him. I did this whole piece on this Kubert school. I interviewed the teachers. I talked to Joe. And as soon as I was done, I opened up my bag and I took out my 6 tours, of all things to bring, tour. And he signed all my tours. And for me, that was it, you know. But I waited until everything was done. I didn't want to start as a fan. I wanted to leave as a fan.
Yeah.
You know, I always tell, because I used to have a sign outside my door, at the office. I used to say, "Leave the fanboy at the door," meaning don't come in and talk to me as a fan. We're not going to have a good conversation. Come in and talk to me as a professional, and we'll be
Yeah, there's a part of the of your work that you did in the last few years that I think people should give a lot more consideration, which is the crazy idea that I don't think anybody but you and Marie in her part could pull off. You know, all the Flintstones books and all those books you did with all the people can call them updates. I just call them rethinkings of the Hanna-Barbera books.
Yeah,
those are sorry about my language. Those are fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And how did you come with that? How did you come with that? You know, they just
you know what?
Hanna-Barbera out the window. Let's just do, you know, with Mark Russell and all those guys, just whatever, or even Garth, you know, whatever you want to do.
Riri was a great partner in crime with me on Convergence. You know, I mean, that she ran a small team as the entire company was being dismantled around her. Was watching it. I always watch these movies. You ever see the movies where the universe is falling apart and there's that one room that's floating in darkness and there's nothing else around it? That was her team.
The protective dome, yeah.
Yeah, and that was her team in Convergence. So we went through the battles together. I absolutely adore the Hanna-Barbera characters. I found them to be untapped potential. But for me personally, they are time-stamped to the 60s. You know what I mean? And if you try to be precious and hold on to them, then you don't have a chance. So the goal was for me personally, I had a huge challenge. And I've been trying different things to launch, but this is the one I really loved. And so what happened was Diane Nelson was overseeing a consumer products area at the time, and as soon as she was, I went to her and said, "Give me the Hanna-Barbera library. I want to play with it." And I knew that, and she knew that I'm crazy. So so I never forgot the day she came into my office, and there's this about a 50-page document. She drops it on my desk. She goes, "Here they are. Have fun." And I'm like, it's like, I got the keys to the kingdom. I finally found that way to open up the treasure chest. And I went through them all, and I looked at things and ideas, and had a thought on each one, just a thought on what these could be and what they're all about. And it was eclectic, and it was outside of the box. And for me, the DC universe was sort of running over here, so this was the way to keep busy, so to speak, and try something different, because I did want to. They were working on the DCU stuff, so I was really focused on doing the Hanna-Barbera. So I sat down with Maria, and we went through every one, and the initial books were the most interesting. And I brought Darwin Cook in at the start to really help visualize, because ultimately we wanted to update, but we did not want to change dramatically, and that was the main goal. But he really helped define that future quest idea, and then ultimately begged off the project when he felt we were moving away from his original thoughts. But the idea was to show that giant superhero team up of all these great characters. I had tried it in the past. I had done the Space Ghost series with I forgot who it was. I want to say it's Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti. I think those are the two. And I think they did a beautiful job with that. And so much so we wanted to do a follow-up, but I ran into problems, believe it or not, internally on getting the rights. We had started a Herculoids. I had started a Johnny Quest, and both of them got killed halfway through it. So this is my chance to finally scratch that itch and really revitalize it. And these guys did a beautiful job, just a beautiful job. And but it wasn't about just doing it what you saw before, but finding a way to talk about it in a new light. And I think everybody really stepped up to the table. and tried some interesting things. And that was the fun part. I mean, listen, you know, these are characters that were sitting quiet for almost 50 years. You know, so if you're going to come out and say, "Oh, let's go and do it as they were 50 years ago," I would say, well, they've been quiet for 50 years because nobody's changed them. If we're going to use them, we got to change them. So, and I think we kept the spirit of them. And I think there was a couple of real interesting pieces there. You know, the Snagglepuss really exceeded expectations. Future Quest exceeded expectations. Flintstones exceeded expectations. Wacky Races was crazy. That shit crazy, man. But I was happy with that because the gag was, I said, let's do Wacky Races as Mad Max. You know, there were all these analogs, you know, and it's just, you know, I really do enjoy it. And as a matter of fact, you know, when you work on so much product over the years, there's only so much you can bring home. And I'm very happy to say there's a piece of my shelf that was basically all the Hanna-Barbera stuff that I feel very proud about. And I got a chance to play in that zone there too. I got a chance to do Top Cat. And one of my plans were, until it was winding down and my time was limited, I wanted to do Top Cat as Howard the Duck in the DCU. That was my ultimate goal. I was desperate to do Top Cat as a Howard the Duck comic. And I did a beautiful special with Shane Davis, which I loved. I had a lot of fun with that. But I wanted to get that same zaniness that the Howards used to have, because you know that's an influential book to me. So the early ones are with Gerber at least, and I wanted to find a way to capture some of that same fun and excitement at DC, you know, because we hadn't had it. Yeah.
In talking about DC, you know, during the whole tenure, you're talking about, you know, this sandbox, the Hanna-Barbera sandbox allowed you, you know, to change things. Of course, when you are in the sandbox of the universe,
Yeah.
you are limited because you can give the illusion of change, but not really change because they have to come back. So, have you feel that there's something that you, after all your years, you said, okay, this was a change that is going to remain, you know, for the foreseeable future legacy, or you don't give a shit about that? They're like, you know what? I did my work. I sold the illusion of change.
Yeah.
And
Listen,
I didn't break anything that is not, you know.
Yeah. Listen, if I think that what I did is going to last forever, there's an arrogance and an ignorance that comes along with that. Okay. Yeah. So that's the first one. So the answer is never thought of that at all. It's got to work for the moment. It's got to work for the story. And then hopefully if it lasts, you know? Because quite honestly, I would be wrong in my approach, because what we did is we undid everybody's changes that were supposed to never change. What did we do? We brought Supergirl back, Kara Zor-El, we brought Barry Allen back, we brought back the multiverse, all these things that were locked away. But if you do that, you limit your story potential for the future, and that I think is restrictive, especially since we have an audience that has an extended history with our line. Meaning, we've been preaching to a very set group of people for a very long period of time. And unfortunately, the illusion of change only works when you're revitalizing and refreshing your audience base and new people are coming in. If it's the same people, they want that evolution. I used to use it. There's two directives I used to use to describe storytelling: Harry Potter and Homer Simpson. Okay, Bart Simpson. And Harry Potter was a constant evolution and growth and change of the character. You're evolving and changing and growing along with them. Everybody's aging together. And if you look at our fan base, a lot of our fan base has that Harry Potter in them, meaning they love, why do I love Dick Grayson? I used to ask people, why do you love Dick Grayson? Why do you love Wally West? Why do you love these characters? And the answer came back over time and time again, is because I grew up with them. They grew up with me. You know, as I aged, they aged. You know, and I always said, okay, that's the reason why. So they had that connection to them in that sense. And meanwhile, if you go to Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, they're Bart and Homer Simpson, meaning, you know, they're ever going to be in elementary school. They're forever going to be doing the same thing over and over and over again. You're just going to change the situation around them, but you're not going to change them. So these are two competing concepts working side by side. And that's when those things hit each other, they create the sparks which force either a reboot or a reset or something, because the joke which wasn't the joke, was any minute Dick Grayson's going to be older than Bruce Wayne. Because Dick Grayson keeps on aging. He keeps on growing up. Bruce is staying eternal. Clark is staying eternal. Everybody else is changing around them. That's what's weird. You sit here and you look at a Green Arrow who has a Connor Hawk, and I'm like, how old is Green Arrow if he's got a 20-something-year-old kid? No, I'm just saying, that's math that nobody really wants to do, because they all lock themselves in the illusion and the story of the moment that they remember best, which is usually the one they first came in on. So that's that constant challenge. And that's why you see the DCU constantly resetting, because once they started to try to evolve and grow the universe and change the universe, they were only changing pieces, not the entire thing, And because of that, that's where all the problems come, And also what it does, it fractures your audience, because I'm a fan of the pre-crisis DCU. I'm a fan of the post-crisis DCU. I'm a fan of the New 52 DCU. I'm a fan of whatever marketing concept they were using to drive the line, because that becomes their timestamp or their sense of ownership.
It's fun because 2 days ago I had Marv in this conversation, and we were talking about something really related to what you just said, which was when I asked about when Wally and Dick left the Titans. Wanted to go back to college in Wally's case, and Marv explained, look, I didn't want to keep Wally because he was just too powerful. Every time they call somebody, if you have the Flash, he's gonna go in and back before everybody else moves. So I literally needed Wally, to be out of the back. But in terms of Dick, the explanation he gave me was really related to what you said. Like, look, the Batman editor at the time came to me and told me, we want to bring Robin back and we want to the again. And Marv was, no, I'm not doing that. I'm working for 50 issues for almost 5 years, to get that kid that was 10, 12 to be an 18, 19-year-old guy.
Right.
If you want, why don't we do it this way? You create a new Robin and we do Nightwing, and that way we can both win. But that's when I think, okay, that's the moment when the split happened, because that's when it was set in stone. Dick Grayson cannot go back.
Yep, exactly, and because of that,
to the whole team, to Wally and to everybody else, you just said they have to be 20, 25-year-olds. And then what happens with Bruce Wayne? How old he is? How Oliver Queen is? How old Aquaman is because of how old Aqualad is? How old Wonder Woman doesn't matter because she's eternal. But you know what I mean.
Listen, that if you want to know the truth, that was one of the reasons why. God help me for saying this out loud again, because I thought this was behind me. That's one of the reasons why I wanted Dick Grayson to die in Infinite Crisis. Yeah, I know. But it was an interesting moment and story beat that I felt really could have propelled the DC universe in a really fascinating direction. But these are not just characters; they're also commodities. So there's a protection of them. But two things that you brought up, I have to say, because these are always funny moments for me. You talked about how strong a character is Wally West. Well, I always laugh because if you ever look at a lineup of all the, how the artists love to draw that lineup of all the characters charging to camera. You see that big picture. The Flash is always like the second or third row, and I'm always going, how is Robin running faster than the Flash in this? Is he giving him a head start? What's he doing? Why are the Flashes in the back row? They shouldn't be in the picture.
It's really funny because Marv mentioned that. It's like, okay, I had to envision the stories, and everything that came to my head before I wrote the script was, okay, Robin telling, Dick telling Wally, okay, you're going to give us a head start. You're going to give us 5 fucking minutes. And when we get there, you get there. Because, the only thing that happened is like, okay, we have an emergence. And before the word, he's there, he's fixed it, he's back, and he's like,
Yeah, and what he said about the Flash, I used to say about the Specter. Specter is the strongest character in the DC universe. If you see any story with the Specter, he's the first one to get knocked out or taken out of the picture. because he's so powerful, he can solve the whole thing himself. So the first thing you do is remove him, you know? And I'm like, yeah, that's why when we did Day of Vengeance, my logic on Day of Vengeance was, okay, let's not move him. Let's make him the bad guy. So now if I make him the bad guy, now I have a reason for everybody else to fight him. So you know what I mean? Because if he was the good guy, then I can't use him because he's too strong and everybody else is worthless. So it's a rather interesting dichotomy we're always faced with on these things, because the goal is to create that fiction, that suspension of reality that is ridiculous but consistent, you know, and that's what the fans buy into. As long as we're true to the rules, the phony rules we set up, you know, that's why when people try to start to apply real science and real logic, my head starts to hurt. I said, you're going down a rabbit hole that's no fun. You take it once you try to apply real science to the characters, you're taking all the fun out of them, you know.
Yeah.
You know, if you know, and because nobody really would wear a cape because they really would choke themselves, jumping over fences and shit, you know.
Let's be honest.
But God, when they draw it, it looks really cool. So accept it. That's part of the you know the clothing or any of these things, or what makes Superman's powers work. Don't try to explain them. You know, because ultimately, once you start going down that hill, it's there's no place. You're not going to land any place good.
Yeah. And you know, I grew up. I'm one of those guys. You know, I grew up with New Teen Titans, with Wally, Dick, etc., etc. So for me, Wally was the Flash.
Yeah.
You know, when Barry came back, I was like, you know, I'd rather have Wally. But I understood the reasons. You know, you wanted to bring back the main characters, the end game. It was part of your plan. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you know, it's part of a universe, and you cannot keep the you know, the character who literally was in a way created the Silver Age of comics.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
cannot
Well,
keep
it's
it forever.
Well, here's the thing with Barry, and this was a rule of thumb. In trying to expand the audience, you want to make it as basic and understanding of the characters and stories as possible. So the problem with Wally West for me, and it's going to be a weird one. I don't know if I've ever said this out loud. My problem with Wally West is that it was almost impossible to tell Wally's origin without knowing Barry's origin. So as soon as you do that, you know what I mean? As soon as you have Wally West being your primary one, you're always going to know he's the second, because
Yes.
his origin was derived from Barry. So Barry was the prime origin. So the problem for me is that if you're trying to bring people in new, you're immediately trying to get them excited about a character in front of you, but you're directing to the character behind him. And even when Barry was introduced, there was no Jay Garrick. Jay Garrick was a comic book. You know, so he was a derivative of Jay Garrick. He tipped his hat to a pre-existing one, but he was his own person. Wally is built 100% on Barry, so you can never talk about Wally without Barry. So you're always going to go back to that. And because of that, also in the other media, everybody was focused on Barry because that's the one they remember for the most part. So we had to get back to Barry in a certain way. But a lot of that was, especially with New 52, I wanted to remove anything that was cumbersome or over-explaining, and you wanted every character had to be able to stand on their own, tell their own story. That's all I really asked for, because ultimately, if they couldn't do that without too much reference, you know, and too much backstory, you lose track. And by the way, let me go even one step further. Why does Hal Jordan come back? Why does Barry Allen come back? Well, Hal Jordan's better than Barry. Hal is a funny one. So they kill Hal Jordan. They come back with Kyle Rayner. I could tell you honestly, you could not go 3 months without a Hal Jordan story being told, either in flashback. All of a sudden, Hal Jordan's a specter. Then they're doing more flashbacks. Then they bring him back as Parallax. They bring back his Ghost. They bring back this. So the amount of Hal Jordan stories told after Hal Jordan left were probably more extensive than when he had his own book. When he had his own book, he had to share it with the Green Lantern Corps. As soon as they killed him, he was a star everywhere. So Hal never was out of the limelight. Same thing with Barry. The amount of reference to Barry Allen in The Flash, and probably one of the best stories, my favorite story, and it's because I like Barry, but one of my favorite stories that Mark Waid told was the Return of Barry Allen, you know, story in that was just amazing. But it just showed me, and I was reading about it and how the sales jumped up and all that, and I said, because everybody wanted to see what it was about Barry. And as soon as Barry left, everything went back down again, you know? So because of that, this showed me there was a lot of value still in that character. So therefore, it was worth the conversation to see whether or not we should bring him back, because ultimately, we're in a, and I'm going to use the B word here, so forgive me. Comics are a business.
No, no.
I know this is sacrilege sometimes, but comics is a business. And
No,
as a
it's not.
business,
We're talking about
yeah,
reality here. And reality is if we
yeah,
don't sell comics, there's no comics. You fans don't get comics every month. So,
yeah,
you have to realize that there's business
yeah,
decisions that are made
yeah.
because we want you to keep reading comics.
Yeah, exactly. And the goal is, everything that we did and everything, is to service the fans we had, to make them excited, to keep them on edge, to come back week after week, but also try to find a way to bring new fans in. And unfortunately, sometimes they were almost contradictory
Yeah.
because of what you needed to do. You know,
Mhm.
so that's the hard part. But I'm loving. I'm looking forward to see what people come up with, because I'll always be a fan. But then again, I'll always go back to the stuff that I first read, because that's my sweet spot.
You were mentioning, that contradiction, that hard part about trying to bring in new readers, and of course this pandemic has caused problem in terms of the distribution with Diamond, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
So from the outside now, I'm not asking you to say anything you don't want to
Okay.
say. Or
Yeah,
say
yeah.
I'm not going in that direction, just in case. How do you think it would be a way, or let me rephrase it so it doesn't sound like I have a secret crazy plan.
Yeah.
Do you think that a multi-distribution system could help bringing in new readers, or do you think that it's going to be exactly the same? It could be exactly the same, like 4, 5, 6 distributors around, or Diamond only. It could be the same, and the problems could be around anyway.
Yeah, here's the thing. Whatever's going on, I'm even though it's been only just a few months, so much has changed that I can't comment on what they're doing. But I will say, the only way a multi-distributed system works is if you have multi places to sell. Okay, that's the issue. It's not just about everybody selling to the same people, but finding other places to sell. You find other places to sell, you have a chance to grow. You sell all to the same thing, you're all going to step on each other's toes.
Yeah.
So for me, that was the logic behind the Walmart material. Was really to expand the base and try to get product in people who might not go into a comic shop, or even no comics are produced anymore, and to get it at a low price. Because again, I go from my own personal experience. It's you want to hear how crazy I am? I'm going to say how crazy I am for a second. There's a website, I think it's Mike's Amazing World of Comics or something like that.
Yeah.
That basically lists. It's called the newsstand section, which shows you what books came out what month. And I actually went back and looked at what books came out when, to try to find my origin of when did I start buying comics on a regular basis. Because I'm kind of intrigued myself, because in my mind now it's sort of just happened, or I've always been reading. So I'm trying to follow my own buying patterns in a way to find out if there's something to replicate, and things to, what got me to where I am as a hardcore fan, and maybe there's something in that might be able to replicate to get other people excited. And I could trace myself back to the Batman TV show in the 60s, the Spider-Man cartoon in the 60s definitely made me buy a Spider-Man and Batman book. My interest in horror, because there was multiple genres. I was more interested in the horror comics, and then I gravitated to the superhero stuff. Swamp Thing and Zemo the Titan pulled me into Batman and to Defenders. So I followed my own pattern there. So it was intriguing to see what made me interested in comics, and what else got me interested in Batman and Superman were the 80-page giants, those big books that had incredible value. You're buying these big books, and there's a lot of stories in there, and there's always those. I always loved anthologies, so there's one or two stories. So that's why when we created the Walmart books, I wanted to capture that feel. Because how did I get into Marvel Comics? I got in Marvel Comics because I read Marvel Tales, and it had 4 or 5 characters in it. Marvel Collector's Item Classic, 4 or 5 characters in it. World's Finest with Superman and Batman, or an 100-page giant with multiple characters. That's how I got exposed to all that stuff. And it was fascinating to me to see this expanse of these worlds through those books. And while reading them, I was able to pick and choose what characters I wanted to follow,
Yeah.
and then I started searching and grabbing and buying all this, from there. So the Walmart idea was to create a way for people to sample as many characters as possible, build it around books that people might know from media, with the hope that they'll do a casual purchase and then get into everything else.
That's what my question was about. I was remembering exactly that Walmart thing, and that's what I was in terms of the multi-distribution. I wasn't, of course, thinking about the same guys selling to different guys just selling to the same people. There's no win on that for anyone. Readers. I'm thinking about reaching new audiences. Distribution. I know you know all this, and you know why it's not possible because you've tried it several million times. But like going to getting through gaming stores, or like the Walmarts you did in Target, etc., etc. So I'm thinking about distribution that is not diamond, or is diamond. I don't care. That gets to where we are now, because that can get the comics. I think is too small compared to the places is rich.
Yeah, I mean, the two biggest problems you're faced with is one size does not fit all. That's one of the reasons why we were creating new material for the Walmart books, because the stories had to be told differently. You're trying to reach a different audience before they get into the bigger world. That's the first one. And the second one, and not really a problem, but it's just a reality. There's just too much product. You talk to a retailer, and like I said, I don't know how a retailer does it. The amount of stress and strain and the work and the logic, and these guys are the real unsung heroes of the comics industry, not just because their stores are in trouble right now, but because the curation of the material and the amount of material and their desperate desire to support as much material as possible, even at their own financial risk, is staggering to me, to be honest with you. When there are 500 books put out on a monthly basis with multiple covers, multiple ideas, multiple directions, and they have to spend a week trying to sift through, deciding what books they buy and the amount on a non-returnable basis, it's no business I want to be in, because the risk is too high. And yet we have people that are extraordinarily devoted and extraordinarily committed to making this work. And even during this pandemic, I've been in touch with a number of retailers over the last month or two, just guys that I've considered friends now, and just talking to them, and the amount of dedication and determination that's going on to get people to buy it. I think honestly, there's a chance you might be able to get a chance to grow your audience, because ultimately, I think you'll see a condensing, a consolidation of the audience base that we do have. So in order to grow, they're going to have to find new people, not just bring old people back, but find new people too. And I think that's when we'll see it. And there's two moments in distributed time that we keep on referring back to. A lot of people keep on referring back to the late 90s, 98, 99, 2000, when the industry was in a dire straits, and people were referring to that. I feel this is much closer to late 70s, 78, 79, when the dormant period when comics were about to move to direct comics. I feel, because I see the stores, they're the stores that are using their inventory to attract people, to generate income, and I think ultimately they're able to curate the real interest of what people want to buy, curate an audience, and then from there they're going to expand out. But the problem is when you put 500 things out on a shelf every month, everybody is so diffused on their choices that it's hard to focus them. I think everybody's focusing now, and we should focus on our base, our strongest supporters, the people who are there, and then build out from that and find a way to expand on that with new people or returning people, whoever. Nobody should be ever turned away from wanting to buy a comic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I have three questions for you.
Okay.
So FC Olex asks, Dan, do you think that DC was pushing Batman? Why was the DC pushing Batman so much for the last few years? He's leading these JL covers where Superman was also in the story, but Batman was the leading character in the covers.
Yeah.
Diverse comics, etc. Do people relate to this human character, you think, over the superpowered ones? So the question finally is, do you think that people relate more to Batman as a human than they relate to superpowered characters?
I think people relate to Batman because he has a timeless origin. Batman's dealing with the loss of his parents, and regardless of how many criminals he catches, how much he saves Gotham, no matter what he does, he can never overcome that grief. He'll never, I love when they have that conversation. Well, why doesn't Batman get therapy? Why doesn't Batman? The therapist could get him over his parents' death, and they said nope, 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 nope. And the reality is that Batman has something that I think everybody can relate to. Powers, no powers, that's not what's important. Something that everybody can relate to. That the fact that he has lost his parents, that grief has driven him into a place that he thinks he's trying to fix it, and he'll never will be able to, because no matter what he does, he will never bring his parents back. So that's why Batman is so great. And ultimately, the other truth be told is, why did we have so much? Why did DC have so much Batman product? It's because Batman product sells. Just reality.
Let's go back to the business part.
Yeah, it goes back to the business job. So you create Batman because Batman sells. If somebody else sold, then we do that. I mean, there was a point there when Jeff Johns was doing Green Lantern, that Green Lantern was challenging Batman as our #1 seller as character, not in awareness, but in comics. And that's why you saw so many derivative products off of Green Lantern. And so when I come back to you, I say very simply, that the more people buy into the story, the more you have a chance to expand that story. If the story isn't working, you recondense to refocus the character to strengthen him up again, and then you can build him out. Because that's what happened with Green Lantern. Is he was so expansive, and then ultimately got diluted, and then you had to get back down to his core again and rebuild that Green Lantern fan base, and then hopefully be able to build out again. And I think that's why Grant was a good choice, because he was able to really focus back on Hal Jordan and not make it about the core, make it about him. But that's it. So what I'm going to say is that characters have to be relatable. They have to have points that people understand. And that's one of the reasons what makes a great character come out of the pack, is that there's a point of them. There's something about them that touches people. And what's great about Batman is that the aspect of Batman losing his parents is a timeless problem. It's not something that comes out of 1938. It's not something else. It's his parents were senselessly gunned down, and unfortunately, that level of violence still consists to this day, 80 years later. It's not something that's been erased. So as long as the sad part is that as long as there's violence and random violence in the streets, Batman will always be a relatable character.
Yeah,
to the fan base. It's just a sad truth, but that's what it is.
Okay, Pedro Monge asks, do you think we will ever see a DC universe with no continuity and only based on something like Black Label, Hanna-Barbera, Hill Comics, Elseworlds, etc.? Do you think that continuity still sells nowadays?
I'm going to say one thing, and this is again consistency. Good storytelling sells, And I'm gonna go to an expression that people use all the time: event fatigue. Okay, people say I have event fatigue, and I say no, you don't. You don't have anything called. There's no such thing called event fatigue. It's called bad stories, or stories I don't care about. Okay, and if the story is great, people will read it. If the story's not great, they won't read it. And that's just the way it works. And the truth be told is, the reason why event fatigue is an expression is because you can only have so many events that are world changing and world building taking place. And if you back them up to each other, then they diminish the value of the event. The only way an event really works is that you have a world changing event, and then you take 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever, to establish that new status quo, to show the ramifications of that event. That goes back to your question before about things changing or not changing. Yeah. And then after that period of time, the next event comes and it creates the new status quo to reinvigorate the line. But the comic industry has gotten into an event rhythm, meaning the only thing that sells is events. So therefore, by backing them into each other, none of them have any sort of resonance that have long-term ramifications. So it diminishes the value of that event. Crisis on Infinite Earths works so well because that event established a status quo that was maintained for a good 10, 20 years, and that's why that resonates with people. That's why it holds value. But when it was interesting to me in the 90s and even recently, when you introduce new companies, brand new companies came out, and they wanted to build their universes and world. And they started with an event. And I'm like, I used to say to myself, how can you reestablish the status quo when you don't even have a status quo? You know, how can you have a crossover event in 4 issues before I even know who the supporting cast is or what this character's purpose is? You know,
Yeah.
so everybody was so rushing the storytelling that unfortunately it diminished the stuff. And you know, DC, myself, guilty, 100% guilty. We rushed some storytelling. In hindsight, should have waited longer for Final Crisis after Infinite Crisis. But again, I'm going to go back to that B word, the business word. You know, once you start making some money or being profitable, you have to maintain that. And unfortunately, you don't have a chance to let things just settle, and you're always chasing things. So when people see something that works, they all chase the things that work, not realizing that it might have worked at one time, but might not work the same way later down the road. Because I thought Final Crisis was an exceptional story, but because everything was so condensed, it just feels rushed instead of something that really had a chance to build. Because you got to build to that moment, and then boom, you know, when it happens, it's a big deal. You know.
Yes. So Logfran asks, hi Dan, can you tell us about how the pre-Infinite Crisis era was formed? I guess that the road to Infinite Crisis must have been excited to make such good comics and to get them all coordinated.
Yeah,
I would say it was really stressful. I was there. But yeah, fun. Let's say it was fun, but you know, it was stressful.
For me, it was that's pure enjoyment for me, that period of time, because that we went in with a plan, and we were bold. And you know, I was working very closely with Jeff and Judd and Greg Rucka. Those are the 3 architects of so much of the Infinite Crisis stuff. And we did a retreat for a couple of days, and really laid out what we wanted to do. The interesting thing about it is between Jeff, Judd, Greg, they were working or touching about a dozen books and every one of the major characters. So because of that, as the writers, they were able to direct their titles with a shared vision. So it was working behind the scenes, you know, in an interesting way. And then when we came up with the story ideas and concepts, the reason behind the story ideas and concepts, it was I wanted to create mini events to get us to the big event. And the purpose of the events was to establish the status quo. So we examined the magic part of the DC universe through Day of Vengeance. We examined the science fiction aspect of the DC universe through Reign of Thanagar War. We examined the ground level experience of the hero with OMAC Project, and then we examined the villains and Villains United. Because I feel villains are so underutilized and underserviced today. In comics, they're not the bad guys. We've turned the villains more interesting than the heroes. But anyway, when we established all those quos, then we were able to direct it into Infinite Crisis. And you know, I always look at Countdown to Infinite Crisis as really probably my real starting point as you know, with hands-on for DCU. Working that book, I edited that book. We spent a lot of time on that. I worked with multiple writers, multiple artists. You were in the middle of that, with Jesus being in the middle of that, you know, on the OMAC stuff and the section of that. And you knew the amount of work that was. But for me, that is still one. It's like, you know, it's still for me one of the high watermarks. Period of time that I enjoyed the most when we were running, when the system worked and the universe was working, really from Countdown to Infinite Crisis to the end of the 52 weekly series, I think is really that period of time that I feel most proud about, and feel that it really accomplished everything I hope to accomplish out of the line. You know, the problem is once you do that, it goes back to what you said. We got to do it more. Okay, great. You want to sit there and reflect and say, this has been a great period of time, except still got to put out another 70 books the next month. So races again. So that's the hard part of, you know.
The wheel keeps on rolling and it goes over your head before you notice, because you just can't stop. And people doesn't realize isn't the machine can't stop. There's some they did that. Even fatigue, they have to no. There's something called the quarterly numbers. There's something called, you know, the machine can't stop. So many times, guys, you have to realize you don't even have time to think. You just can't react.
Yeah, exactly, and that's and this stuff is moving in multiple directions, and it's trying to keep it contained. And Paul said, and Paul gave me that speech. He says, "Listen, you can run it real tight for a while, but you got to let go." So after 52, we sort of let go because we had to let it sort of go its own route and breathe in its own manner, because it's hard to maintain that for so long and focus it for long without breaking the entire system. And we came close to breaking it, but we. Still bodies, still you have there's some good battle scars, but we did I have to believe we did I think there was an admirable job on that.
Yes.
And that's the fun part, and it's a lot of good in the bad. Like I said, that it's very interesting because it's funny when you say something during that period of time. I only remember the good. I don't remember the bad. Which is weird because you could go the opposite way on other things.
No. But I of all the years we've worked together, then it's been a good amount of it. It's been good. There's been bad, but I probably with you, the pre-Infinite Crisis and Infinite Crisis era was probably the most fun we were having because it was stressful, as I said, partly joking, but partly because it was really stressful. But it was really fun, and
it's funny for me because I was going through some old files of mine, just cleaning up everything in the house. So going through more files, and I found these. I used to the beginning of each year, I used to put a proposal in front of Paul about what I wanted, what I thought the DCA should do, where it should go. Just a 10-page document of all the suggestions, and he would send it back. Yes, Joe, yes, Joe, yes, Joe, whatever. And there was one year, for the year following Infinite Crisis, I probably went back in 3 times, and I didn't get exactly where I wanted to be, but whatever. It was but it's funny reading the books, reading these documents, going, oh yeah, I remember we wanted. Oh, that makes sense now. And I use a story. I'll say the story that I told somebody the other day. Amazon's Attack, perfect example. So Amazon's Attack was originally planned to be one of the miniseries leading into Infinite Crisis. It was one, and I've got a beautiful piece of art that Phil Jimenez did. That actually was basically my sales pitch piece to Paul for Infinite Crisis. And if you look at the art very closely, you'll see the Amazon's attack, the Amazon's burning down Washington, D.C. in the background. And ultimately, the story was that when Themyscira was in limbo or somewhere, came back, it landed 90 miles off the shore of Washington, D.C. Washington wanted to send weapons inspectors into Themyscira to find out if it was a threat to Washington. The Amazons turned away all the people from the U.S. They explained, you're not allowed on our island. So U.S. sets up a blockade around the Amazons, and something happens to the blockade. Then the U.S. invades the Amazons, and the Amazons slaughter them, and then go to Washington to basically make sure there's no more attacks on them. So that was the story. It was insane in everything else going on, and it was right in the middle of the Gulf War, and to the second one. And ultimately, we did not want to do something that cast American soldiers in a negative light. It was very sensitive at the time. Should have let the story die because it worked so perfectly for that moment for what we were trying to do. We tried to bring it back later, and the problem was it didn't have the same emotional resonance, and it didn't have the same sense. So that was one of those cases we should have let an idea just rest when it didn't work, because there's always this, because again, like you said, there's this constant churn of material, so you're always recycling things or searching for things that you haven't tried or wanted to try that you didn't work once before to keep the system moving. That was one of the cases we probably should have rested it, but it's interesting to see just all the busted and broken ideas that ultimately resurrect themselves in some way, shape, or form years later, probably subliminally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Back in your head somewhere, and you probably think when you actually did it 5 years, 6 years later, it was an original idea, but it wasn't. It was something that was on a thought or an idea from 5 years earlier that you never got to realize, and somehow just winds up manifesting itself yet again. It's kind of.
So we have a guy I think named Mr. Jerry Gladstone.
Okay.
Jerry, of course, Midtown Comics Jerry.
Yes.
Says, I agree with Dan 100% about event fatigue. That and superhero fatigue in movies is all bullshit. It can only be story fatigue.
Yeah. Listen, The people that push the fatigue concept, superhero fatigue or event fatigue, are people that don't enjoy the medium in some weird ways, or they want it to go away. You know what I mean? So they're
Yeah.
looking for a reason to say that it's over, even while it's at its strongest. And so therefore, for me, our job is to constantly prove those people wrong. If somebody says they're event fatigue, then I say, uh-oh, we're not doing our job. We're not telling the best stories. Okay, let's up our game. Let's tell a better story. Let's find a way to fix it in a way that matters. So that way, when everybody buys into it, all of a sudden event fatigue goes away. You know, same thing with superhero fatigue. You know, if there's superhero fatigue, it's only because the things that are coming out aren't exceptional or aren't capturing the attention as they did when they first happened.
Yes.
Our big problem is, you know, the creators in the 50s and 60s and 70s up to the 80s were lucky in the sense, in a weird way, lucky in the sense that their material was being judged for what's on the shelf at the moment, not for everything that came before.
Yes.
All the comics that came before were in back issue bins or in somebody's house. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, if somebody wanted to compare somebody's great work to whatever is going on right now, they'd have to go look it up.
Mm-hmm.
But now we have bookshelves of material that's evergreen, you know? For now, you know, it's like Dark Knight will always be the high watermark for superhero comics, and people will always be judging Batman against those high watermarks, you know? But beforehand, it was against the reprints or the Neil Adams stuff. Or
Yeah.
for me, it was my Batman was Englehart Rogers. That was my Batman.
Yes.
You know, that was my defining moment for Batman. You know, but here's the thing: people are now they come in, they start with the best material. Do you tell people what are you going to read? I'm going to go. What do you tell people to read when they first come? New reader, go read Watchmen, go read Dark Knight Returns. Okay, now go buy a book off the shelf. You're setting up expectations that you might not be able to realize at the end of the day. I'm like, wait a minute, those 10 books you sent me to read, those were great. I read Kingdom Come, I read Batman, I read this, I read Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, I read this, I read that. I'm like, oh, these are all great. Oh, what? Who's this Wally? What? How many Flashes? How many Robins? How many, you know, what's going on? You have any more books you can recommend?
Absolutely. I have Jim Roche says the Bengali team is Bengali. I think it's Bengali.
Yeah, I know, Jim. Hey, Jim.
The Bengali team on lockdown in Chicago says hi.
I tell him I miss those guys. I was supposed to be in Chicago and I miss seeing them. But tell him, listen, Jim, tell Sven, tell them all, you're the only guys keeping me sane on Saturdays. And that's the only way I know what day of the week it is now, is that Svenguli's on Saturday night. So I put a timestamp on Saturday night, and then we count every day until the next Svenguli next Saturday. So I think today's, if I count my numbers correctly, Wednesday, Thursday, right? Somewhere around there.
Good thing of having a 6-year-old is that every day she gets up from bed, she goes to the refrigerator, we have a calendar, you know, and she goes to the calendar. Maxie there says, Daddy, Mommy, today is Wednesday, the May whatever, and you're like, okay, thank you, because I have lost a track if you didn't tell me. So that's good. So next, future. What is something in mind, nothing in mind?
Yeah, I mean,
have you thought about coming back to the East Coast, or you're finding somebody we both know, you better than me, loves Xanadu so much to leave it?
I'm trying to get her to leave the room so I can tell this. No.
Wait,
yeah, no. So I mean, for me, it's it's interesting. I mean, we're here for at least the next 2 years, at the very least. Just for family reasons, school reasons, and things like that. So that's the good part. To be honest, one of my first loves. I have 3 great loves in my life besides Leilani. I played my audience.
Drop the hammer.
It's animation. It's animation. It's comics, and it's monsters. And I've always been finding a way to mix and match those things as we go along. I'm combining 2 of those right now with the hope to be able to bring them out in a certain way. So we're having some fun with them all the time. Yeah.
By the way, I just remembered. Do you still keep the Godzilla thing I sent you years ago?
Oh, of course I do. Yes, that monster's still in my house. Yeah. As a matter of fact, you know, I've been doing a lot of cleaning up. I get overwhelmed with the amount of Godzilla stuff. I'm like, wow, you're really crazy sometimes.
But yeah, and where did that love for Godzilla came from? Comics too,
it's
monster
everything. Look, all the great loves in my life. Monsters, dinosaurs. Naturally, I was a dinosaur kid. You know, as a kid of the '60s, and I'm a kid of the '60s. What were your great loves? Dinosaurs, spies, space stories. Those are my first things. You know, and then ultimately it turns into monster movies. Dinosaurs get me into monster movies. Monster movies get me everywhere else. Dinosaurs get me into Godzilla. You know, we used to go to my brother used to take me and my friends to the Godzilla double features. So we used to see Godzilla. We saw Destroy All Monsters in the theater, Monster Zero, double feature with War of the Gargantuas, which is one of my all-time favorites. You know, it's that 10-year-old kid that never leaves you. You know, and I think that imprint from I would say from 8 to 12 or 10 to 12 is indelible. And I think that defines you. And it's funny because, you know, we lose sight of that in comics. If you wanted the truth, I was talking to somebody about conventions the other day. And I was talking to him, and there was this, and we have such an older fan base and an older audience, and a lot of people starting to read in their 20s and 30s. So that's why the craft and the quality of the material is so high, because your expectations are higher older in life. But, you know, and a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old's unforgiving, you know, very forgiving, I should say, very forgiving. He just wants to be entertained and excited. And our job's to entertain and excite them. You know, and it's funny because Jim Roche was on about Svengoolie. Svengoolie triggers the 10-year-old in me. You know, just the craziness, the puns, the joy of what it is to be a kid. So much of what we do is supposed to do that. And honestly, our fan base holds on to it so tightly, it chokes the life out of it in some ways. And they should loosen their grip to really take it all in and just enjoy the insanity of what we do and the pleasure that it gives. But when I go to conventions, you know, you always see older people there. And whenever a kid comes up, you get super excited, you know, because and one kid was talking to me and he had such in-depth knowledge about our stuff. I'm like, what's going on? I couldn't comprehend for a second. And I'm like, nah, I was that kid. At 10, 11, 12-year-olds, I can recite almost what was in every issue of Spider-Man or Captain America or who the team-ups were in Brave and Bold, like this, you know? And I'm like, there he is doing it to me. And I'm like, you're my future, kid. I gotta make sure we keep you. And one funny story I'll tell is that we were doing a convention and and the kid gets up, little kid gets on, and he asks me, and it was during New 52. He goes, so when are you going to bring back Wally West? And I did my tap dance. I'm answering that question, you know, and I'm not saying, well, you know, Barry Allen's back and we have all these great plans and all this.
Live streaming is
Yeah, we're
on.
back.
Okay, we're sorry about that. We lost you guys for once. You know, streaming. Everybody in the world is doing streaming. So,
and then they all put their clothes back on. It's the best story I can ever tell you.
Calm yourself. We can see you. Anyway, so I was just saying, I meet you. I hope you come back in any way, shape, or form.
What shape are you looking? Because I'm working on trying to change my shape a little bit. No,
I want to see those muscles, man.
It's funny. I was chatting with an artist this morning before this, and just saying, you know, it's like a third act in some ways, you know. So, you know, just it's kind of fun about that. There's something kind of exciting about that. And what it is, it's a little hard to determine now, given the world stopped.
Yeah.
But it does give you a time to think about things and hopefully come back in a fun and exciting way, or not. I feel good. Yeah, that's the best part about it. You know, that's that's a reality too. I mean, part of this is what's really important to me right now. Honestly, got a new granddaughter that I haven't been able to see in a couple of months, and that's distressing. We're watching, do a lot of streaming. I got a second grandchild on the way with my younger son's wife's expecting for the first. So there's a lot of good life ahead, and I'm very lucky in that sense. And honestly, you know, to be able to do and be able to work in the areas that I have for as long as I have, no regrets, no problems, man. It's all good. That's why it's more about picking and choosing something you really enjoy, more so than just trying to stay involved in something that I think, quite honestly, I had a lot of fun with. And right now, my issue is make sure everybody's healthy, safe, and my family's good, and get a chance to see my kids. That's a fun part.
And now you have to go exercise with Leilani, or at least he's going to try.
I can't keep up to her. She's dangerous.
No, she's a machine. I remember when we were on the train together in LA last time.
Yeah, I'll bring him.
Told me all about it, and I was like, I can't do that.
No, I'm done. I get out in the mornings. It's good. You know what? The best part about the job is the friends you made, the people you know, and making sure that you don't lose touch with them. That's my biggest concern.
We are not going to lose touch, believe me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or not. As I said before, as I said when you left DC, as I said when I was using, this is about the friendship.
Yeah.
I'm going to be your friend as long as you want me to. So,
Oh, I have. Oh, okay, good. That's good to know. Okay,
shut up. I'm going to throw
I'll see you soon. I'm sure.
I have Moon, believe it or not. Shut up, Moon. Anyway, so thank you so much, Dan. Thank you so much, everybody.
My pleasure, sir. Always a pleasure. It's always great talking to you.
Don't leave. I'm going to cut the streaming now,
okay,
so I can tell you proper goodbye. I'm saying goodbye to everybody. Thank you,
everybody.
We just wanted to say proper goodbye after the connection was cut.
Yeah.
And hopefully Dan will come back whenever he wants or not. And if he comes back, maybe we'll bring some guests and do some crazy stuff with booze. Or we have to bring Jimmy and drink and chat about shit.
That sounds like a plan.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Tomorrow, mañana, we have as our guest, tendremos como invitado al señor Rubén Pellejero. I don't want to forget. Bye. Hasta luego.